By the end of those weeks, several things had happened that the school could talk about for the rest of the term. A girl had walked up to the most feared student in Sunrise Academy and calmly told her to leave her alone. Camille, who had spent years controlling conversations without ever raising her voice, had stood frozen. And Maurice. Maurice had become the only person carrying a secret capable of destroying everyone involved. The rumors spread faster than the morning assembly announcements. Every corridor carried a different version. Some students said Rina had shouted. Others claimed she had threatened Camille. One dramatic version insisted that teachers had almost stepped in. None of it was true. The students who had actually witnessed it remembered something completely different. Rina had spoken quietly, without shaking, without insulting anyone, without fear. That somehow had been even more frightening, because everyone expected anger. Nobody expected certainty. Inside the library, however, none of those stories mattered. The room remained exactly the same. The smell of old books, the slow turning of pages, the occasional scratch of pencils against paper. Kelvin was already seated when Rina walked in. "You are 3 minutes early," he said without looking up. "You noticed. You've been early every Tuesday." She smiled. "I didn't know someone was keeping records." "I don't keep records. You just remember everything." "I remember useful things." She sat across from him. "So, I'm useful?" He paused just long enough to realize what she'd asked. "I meant." She laughed. "I'm joking." For a moment he simply stared. "You laugh more now." "I do." "Yes." "I hadn't noticed." "I have." Neither of them said anything after that. They simply opened their books. Somehow silence had become easier between them than conversation had ever been with anyone else. Across the room, Maurice watched them. Not openly. Never openly. Just often enough that guilt kept returning. He remembered every sheet of paper he had pinned to those notice boards before midterm. Every lie. Every accusation. At the time it had seemed harmless. Now, watching Kelvin genuinely happy for perhaps the first time in years. Watching Rina finally beginning to smile. He hated himself. "You're reading the same page." Maurice looked up. Aminette stood beside his table. "What? You've been staring at that page for 5 minutes." "Oh. You okay?" "I'm fine." "No. He closed the book. "I'm just thinking. About." He hesitated. "Nothing." Aminette studied him for several seconds. "You know," she said quietly, "people who keep saying nothing are usually thinking about something very big." She walked away before he could answer. Maurice watched her leave. Then he looked toward Camille. She wasn't reading. She wasn't writing. She was watching. Watching Rina. Again. That evening, Camille sat alone behind the senior hostel. The courtyard lights flickered weakly against the concrete. She heard footsteps. "I knew you'd be here. Maurice. You came." "You asked." He remained standing. She looked unusually calm. Too calm. "Have you thought about what I said?" "I have. And I don't think this is a good idea. You've changed." "I've grown up." "No." She smiled. "You've become scared." "I'm not scared." "Then help me." Maurice rubbed his forehead. "Camille?" "What?" "Leave her alone." She laughed. Actually laughed. "You sound exactly like Kelvin." "I'm serious." "So am I." She leaned forward. "I've spent weeks watching her. And nobody is that careful without a reason. Maurice. She locks that locker every single time. So. She never lets anyone stand behind her while she's opening it. So. She checks the lock twice before leaving." He sighed. "Some people are private. Not like that." "You don't know." "I intend to." Silence. Then she said the words that made Maurice's stomach tighten. "I've already found someone willing to help." His head snapped up. "What?" "You heard me." "Who?" "I'm not telling you." The next afternoon, Rina returned to her classroom after chemistry. She stopped. Her locker door was slightly open. Not wide. Just enough. She frowned. "I locked this." She looked inside. Everything appeared exactly where she'd left it. Books. Files. Pens. The small notebook she never let anyone see. Nothing seemed disturbed, yet something felt wrong. She closed the locker slowly. Behind her, someone disappeared around the corner before she turned. Everything okay? Kelvin approached carrying 2 textbooks. I think so. You don't sound convinced. My locker. What about it? I thought someone opened it. Did they? I don't know. He glanced toward the corridor. Tell the prefect. She shook her head. I have no proof. You don't need proof to report something suspicious. I'll just keep an eye on it. Kelvin frowned. You shouldn't have to. That evening, Aminat found Rina sitting alone outside the hostel. You skipped dinner. I wasn't hungry. You are now. She handed her a meat pie. Rina looked surprised. You bought this. You've forgotten to eat twice this week. I didn't realize. I did. Rina accepted it. Thank you. Aminat smiled. You know. What? You're becoming part of this place. Rina looked toward the school buildings. It still doesn't feel like home. It will. I'm not sure. You have friends now. I didn't expect that. I know. After a long silence, Aminat asked gently, Can I ask you something? You can. Why are you so protective of your locker? Rina stopped eating. Her eyes remained on the ground. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then, because everything important I still have fits inside it. Aminat frowned. What do you mean? Rina's voice became quieter. When I left my old school, she stopped. I couldn't bring much. Aminat didn't interrupt. My books. My certificates. My mother's letters. My brother's photograph. My old journal. They're all in there. She smiled faintly. If something happened to that locker, I'd lose the last pieces of where I came from. Aminat reached across and gently squeezed her hand. I'm sorry. Rina nodded once. I don't usually tell people that. I'm glad you told me. From the balcony above, unseen by either of them, someone had heard every word. Camille stepped back into the shadows. So, she whispered to herself, there really is something inside. Her eyes narrowed. It isn't just books. She turned and walked away. Tomorrow, she decided, would be the beginning. Not of another rumor. Not of another anonymous paper. Something much bigger. Something no one at Sunrise Academy would ever forget. Maurice did not sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Rina sitting on the hostel bench, quietly explaining why she guarded her locker so carefully. My mother's letters. My brother's photograph. They're the last pieces of where I came from. His stomach tightened. He had expected secrets. Not memories. Not grief. Not a girl trying desperately to protect the few things she had left. Across the girls' hostel, however, another student remained wide awake for a very different reason. Camille stood beside her window, staring across the courtyard toward the opposite building. Her mind replayed every word she had overheard. Everything important is inside. She smiled to herself. So there really is something worth hiding. She reached into her drawer and pulled out a small notebook. Opening to a blank page, she wrote 3 words. Locker. Opportunity. Tomorrow. Morning assembly arrived beneath a sky covered with gray clouds. Students lined up in neat rows while teachers walked between them. The principal reminded everyone about the upcoming academic competition. The top 5 students from each class, he announced, will represent Sunrise Academy. Immediately whispers spread through the rows. Everyone already knew who would qualify. Kelvin, Rina, Camille. The remaining places were still uncertain. Maurice stared straight ahead. The competition no longer excited him. Every announcement seemed to remind him that his own mistake had started everything. After assembly, Kelvin caught up with Rina outside the science block. You forgot this. He handed her a notebook. My chemistry notes. You left them in the library yesterday. She smiled. Thank you. You've been distracted, have I? You looked behind you 3 times during assembly. She hesitated. It's probably nothing. You've said that before. And it usually isn't nothing. She laughed quietly. You notice too much. I notice enough. She looked around the courtyard. Students hurried toward classrooms. Everything looked perfectly normal. Yet the uncomfortable feeling remained, as if someone were watching. Inside class SS2A, Miss Rachel entered carrying a stack of marked tests. I was impressed. Several students straightened immediately. The average score improved. She began calling names. Kelvin, 87. He accepted his paper without expression. Very good. Rina, 84. A few students turned toward her. She simply thanked the teacher. Camille, 82. Camille forced a smile. Her eyes drifted toward Rina. For the first time since arriving at Sunrise Academy, someone had consistently scored above her. Only by a few marks. But enough. Enough for people to notice. Enough for teachers to compare them. Enough to make Camille feel something she had almost forgotten. Competition. Lunch break arrived. The canteen buzzed with conversation. Amina dropped into the seat beside Rina. I have wonderful news. What? I passed mathematics. You sound surprised. I am surprised. Rina laughed. I told you the extra practice would help. It helped because you explained everything. Kelvin appeared carrying a tray. Is this seat taken? No. He sat. For a few peaceful minutes. They simply ate. No rumors. No arguments. No tension. Just ordinary conversation. Maurice watched from another table. Then someone sat opposite him. Camille. You've been avoiding me. I've been busy. Liar. He sighed. What do you want? She leaned closer. I found the timetable. For what? The girls leave their hostel during sports period tomorrow. So, the corridors will be empty. Maurice's expression changed immediately. No. You don't even know what I'm going to say. I know enough. I'm only looking. You'll get caught. I won't. You don't know that. She smiled. I always know. Maurice pushed his tray away. If you touch her locker, I'm listening. I'm telling the principal. For a brief moment, something flashed across Camille's face. Not anger. Disappointment. You've changed more than I realize. She stood. And that's unfortunate. She walked away. Maurice remained frozen. He had just threatened the one person who had controlled half the school for years. Yet, strangely, he didn't regret it. That evening the library was unusually quiet. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Kelvin looked up from his physics textbook. Question. Rina closed her notebook. Go ahead. Why medicine? She blinked. What? You always borrow biology books that aren't part of our syllabus. She smiled faintly. I thought nobody noticed. I notice enough. She looked toward the rain outside. When I was younger, my mother became very sick. Kelvin remained silent. There wasn't a specialist near where we lived. She paused. We spent months traveling from hospital to hospital. She survived. Yes. A small smile appeared, but watching doctors save her. She looked down at her notebook. I think that's when I decided. You want to become one. I've wanted nothing else. Kelvin nodded slowly. I used to think I wanted law. What changed? My father. She looked up. He continued quietly. I realized I didn't actually want law. I wanted his approval. Neither of them spoke. Sometimes silence understood more than words. Outside the library door, Maurice stood holding a book. He had arrived moments earlier. He had heard enough. He turned away without entering. The guilt grew heavier with every passing day. Later that night, Camille unlocked a small metal box beneath her bed. Inside lay a collection of duplicate hostel keys. Years of careful observation. Years of opportunities. She lifted one key, examined it beneath the desk lamp, then placed it carefully into her pocket. Tomorrow. Sports period. Girls' hostel. Empty corridors. Everything was ready. She switched off the light. A slow smile crossed her face. Across campus, Rina slept peacefully. She had no idea that someone had already decided tomorrow would be the day her carefully protected locker would finally be opened. The next morning arrived with an unusual stillness. Dark clouds still hung above Sunrise Academy, but the rain had stopped. The football field glistened from the night storm, and students hurried between buildings before the first bell. Rina checked her locker before heading to class. Everything was exactly where she had left it. Her biology textbook, her journals, a neatly folded envelope tied with a faded blue ribbon. She closed the locker carefully. As always, she checked the lock twice. Kelvin noticed. "You still think someone touched it?" "I don't know. But you're worried." She nodded. "A little. If anything happens." She looked at him. "Tell me first." She smiled. "I will." During second period, the school buzzed with excitement. Sports period had been moved earlier because of the weather. Students poured onto the football field, basketball court, and athletics track. Teachers spread out across the campus supervising activities. The girls' hostel gradually emptied, exactly as Camille had expected. She stood near the edge of the basketball court, pretending to watch the game. Her eyes drifted toward the hostel building. No movement. No teachers. No students. She quietly slipped away. Maurice saw her leave. His heart immediately began racing. No. He looked toward the basketball court. Kelvin was helping Rina practice free throws. Neither of them noticed Camille disappearing. Maurice hesitated for only a second. Then he ran. The girls' hostel corridor was silent. Camille walked confidently toward Rina's room. She already knew which locker belonged to her. She had watched often enough. She removed the duplicate key from her pocket. "This better be worth all the trouble," she whispered. The key slid into the lock. It turned. Click. The locker opened. For a moment she simply stared. No hidden money. No examination papers. No stolen documents. Only neatly arranged belongings. Books. Exercise files. A small wooden box. A framed photograph. Several envelopes tied together. A worn leather journal. Camille frowned. "This is what you've been hiding." She reached toward the journal. Before her fingers touched it, "Camille." The voice froze her completely. She turned slowly. Maurice stood at the end of the corridor, breathing heavily from running. "What are you doing?" She quickly closed the locker. "I was..." "No." He walked closer. "Don't lie." "I wasn't stealing. You opened her locker." "I only wanted to look." "You had no right." She folded her arms. "You followed me?" "I tried to stop you. You chose her." Maurice stared at her. "No. I chose what was right." For several seconds neither spoke. Finally Camille laughed softly. "You've changed more than Kelvin has." She brushed past him. "This conversation isn't over." She disappeared down the stairs. Maurice remained standing in front of the locker. His hands shook. He looked at the slightly open door. Carefully, without touching anything inside, he closed it and locked it. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have stopped this sooner." On the basketball court, Rina finally made another shot. It went in. Kelvin laughed. "You're improving. I've scored 3. You've scored 4. I counted wrong." "I notice." She shook her head. "You notice everything." "Not everything." Before she could answer, the whistle blew, signaling the end of sports period. Students began returning toward the academic blocks. Maurice emerged from the hostel a few moments later. His face was pale. Kelvin frowned. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." "I just need some water." He walked away before either of them could ask another question. The rest of the day felt strangely normal. Classes continued. Assignments were collected. Teachers explained new topics. Yet Maurice barely heard a single lesson. His mind remained fixed on one image. The photograph inside Rina's locker. A young girl standing beside an older woman, both smiling at the camera. There had been no scandal. No evidence. Only memories. Only family. And Camille had nearly violated all of it. That evening, Maurice knocked gently on Rina's classroom door. She looked up from her notebook. "Maurice? Can we talk?" Kelvin and Aminat exchanged a glance. "We'll wait outside," Aminat said quietly. The room became silent. Maurice struggled to find the words. He stopped. "What is it?" "I owe you another apology." She looked confused. For what? For more than you'll probably ever know. Maurice. I can't explain everything. His voice shook. But if anyone ever asks about your locker? Her expression immediately changed. What about my locker? He realized his mistake. He had revealed too much. She stood. What happened? I can't tell you. Why? Because. He lowered his head. I'm trying to fix it before it gets worse. For several long seconds, neither of them moved. Finally, Rina spoke quietly. If someone touched my things. Maurice closed his eyes. I'm sorry. He turned and walked away. Rina remained standing in the empty classroom. Her heartbeat quickened. Something had happened.
She didn't know what.
She only knew one thing. Someone had crossed a line. And whoever it was, they weren't finished yet. Across the campus, in the girls' hostel, Camille sat alone on her bed. She replayed the contents of the locker over and over. Letters. Photographs. A journal. Nothing useful. Nothing she could use against Rina. Unless. Her eyes slowly widened. The journal? If Rina had written about her past, about why she had left St. Catherine's, then the answers Camille had been searching for might still exist. She smiled slowly. I looked in the wrong place. The locker wasn't a secret. The journal is. Outside, thunder rolled across the evening sky. Inside Sunrise Academy, friendships were growing stronger. But so were the secrets. And Camille had just chosen her next target.